Princess Charlotte Elizabeth Diana had always been the brightest star in the royal family. Her infectious laughter could fill the grand halls of Kensington Palace, and her curious nature made every royal engagement feel like an adventure. At 9 years old, she possessed a confidence that both impressed and sometimes worried her parents. Prince William and Catherine. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of their private dining room as Charlotte sat at breakfast, her school uniform perfectly pressed, but her hair already showing signs of her active morning routine. She had been up early, as usual, practicing her piano pieces and reading ahead in her history books. Charlotte wasn't just naturally intelligent. She was driven in a way that surprised everyone around her. "Mummy, did you know that Queen Victoria was only 18 when she became queen?" Charlotte asked, looking up from her porridge with bright, inquisitive eyes. Catherine smiled warmly at her daughter, though she noticed the intensity behind the question. Charlotte had been asking more and more questions about royal duties and responsibilities lately. William lowered his newspaper and studied his daughter carefully. There was something different about Charlotte recently, something that both he and Catherine had begun to notice. She seemed older somehow, more serious about things that other children her age would find boring. While her brothers, George and Louis, were content to play with their toys and enjoy being children, Charlotte spent her free time reading biographies of historical figures and asking detailed questions about royal protocols. The drive to school that morning was typical in many ways. Charlotte sat quietly in the back seat, her school bag organized perfectly beside her, while her protection officer drove through the London streets. But instead of looking out the window at the passing scenery like most children would, Charlotte was reviewing notes she had written about a history project. Her teacher had mentioned that students could choose to write about any historical figure, and Charlotte had immediately chosen Queen Elizabeth I. At school, Charlotte's behavior had begun to concern some of her teachers. While she was undoubtedly one of the brightest students they had ever taught, there was an intensity to her studies that seemed unusual for a child her age. During break times, when other children played games or chatted about their favorite television shows, Charlotte could often be found in the library, reading books that were typically assigned to much older students. Mrs. Henderson, Charlotte's favorite teacher, had noticed these changes most acutely. She remembered the little girl who had started at the school just a few years earlier, full of giggles and mischief, like any normal child. That Charlotte still existed, but she seemed to be disappearing behind layers of seriousness and determination that felt almost adult-like in their intensity. During lunch, Charlotte sat with her usual group of friends, but the conversations felt different lately. While her classmates discussed their weekend plans or complained about homework, Charlotte found herself thinking about the speech she was supposed to give at the upcoming school charity event. She had volunteered to represent her class, and she wanted everything to be perfect. The weight of representing her family name, even in such a small setting, felt enormous to her. "Charlotte, are you coming to Emma's birthday party this weekend?" asked her friend Sophie, pulling Charlotte back from her thoughts about the speech. Charlotte looked up, almost surprised by the question. Birthday parties felt somehow frivolous to her now, though she couldn't quite understand why. "I think so," she replied, though her mind was already drifting back to the research she wanted to do about effective public speaking techniques. That evening, as Catherine tucked Charlotte into bed, she decided to address what she had been observing. The bedroom was decorated with a perfect balance of royal elegance and childhood wonder. But lately, Charlotte seemed more interested in the books lining her shelves than the toys scattered around the room. "Darling, you seem to have a lot on your mind lately," Catherine said gently, sitting on the edge of Charlotte's bed. "Is everything all right at school?" Charlotte looked up at her mother with those serious blue eyes that seemed to hold thoughts far beyond her years. "Everything's fine, Mummy. I just want to make sure I'm ready." "Ready for what, sweetheart?" Charlotte was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "For whatever comes next. George will be king someday, and I want to be ready to help him. I want to be useful." The words hit Catherine like a gentle blow to the chest. Here was her 9-year-old daughter, already feeling the weight of royal responsibility, in a way that seemed to be changing her fundamental nature. Catherine had always known this day would come, when her children would begin to truly understand what their birth meant for their futures. But she hadn't expected it to happen so soon, or so intensely. Charlotte, you have plenty of time to worry about those things. Right now, your job is just to be a little girl and enjoy being 9 years old. But Charlotte's expression suggested she disagreed. But Mummy, if I don't start preparing now, how will I know what I'm supposed to do? How will I know if I'm good enough? The question revealed so much about what was happening inside Charlotte's young mind. She wasn't just growing up. She was placing enormous pressure on herself to become worthy of a role that wouldn't be hers for decades, if ever. The transformation was subtle but undeniable, and it was happening faster than anyone in the family had anticipated. Over the next few weeks, the changes in Charlotte became more pronounced. She began declining invitations to play dates, preferring to spend her time reading or practicing what she called important skills. She started paying much closer attention to how her parents conducted themselves during official engagements, taking mental notes about their posture, their speech patterns, and how they interacted with different types of people. William first noticed the change during a family dinner, when Charlotte corrected Louis's table manners with an authority that seemed to come from nowhere. "Louis, you need to hold your fork properly," she said firmly. "People will be watching us." The comment was innocent enough, but it revealed how differently Charlotte was beginning to see herself and her family's position in the world. She was no longer just a child who happened to be born into the royal family. She was becoming someone who felt personally responsible for upholding the family's reputation and standards. Catherine and William exchanged worried glances across the dinner table. They had always tried to give their children as normal a childhood as possible, but it seemed that Charlotte was choosing to embrace the more formal aspects of royal life earlier than they had ever expected. The little girl who had once delighted in getting her hands dirty in the garden was now concerned about maintaining perfect posture even during family meals. The transformation was particularly evident during Charlotte's interactions with the household staff. She had always been polite and well-mannered, but now there was a formal distance in her behavior that hadn't existed before. She spoke to the staff with the kind of careful courtesy usually reserved for official functions, as if she were constantly practicing for some future role. Mrs. Kelly, who had worked for the royal family for years and had watched Charlotte grow up, mentioned her concerns to Catherine one afternoon. "She asked me yesterday about the proper way to address foreign dignitaries. I wondered if perhaps she was working on a school project." Catherine knew it wasn't for school. Charlotte was preparing herself for a future that still seemed impossibly distant, but which had somehow become very real and immediate in her 9-year-old mind. The weight of expectation, both real and imagined, was transforming her daughter in ways that made Catherine's heart ache with a mixture of pride and worry. The evening before Charlotte's charity speech at school, she practiced in front of her bedroom mirror for hours. Catherine watched from the doorway, seeing her daughter's small frame standing perfectly straight, her hands clasped behind her back in a pose that mirrored the formal stance she had observed during royal events. The speech itself was beautifully written and perfectly delivered, but it seemed to belong to someone much older than the little girl giving it. As Charlotte climbed into bed that night, Catherine sat beside her once again, trying to find the right words to address what was happening. The room felt different somehow, as if childhood itself was slowly retreating from this space that had once been filled with fairy tales and imaginary games. "Charlotte, I'm very proud of how hard you're working on your speech, but I want you to know that it's perfectly fine to just be yourself tomorrow. You don't have to be perfect. When you're one, with consented by longted, to the runted by 2-350. Charlotte looked up at her mother with an expression that seemed almost puzzled by the suggestion. "But Mummy, if I'm not perfect, then I'm not doing my job properly." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that neither of them could have fully understood at the time. Charlotte wasn't just growing up. She was transforming herself into someone who felt responsible for living up to standards that would challenge even the most experienced adults. The change was happening so gradually that it felt natural, but so completely that the carefree little girl they had known seemed to be disappearing before their eyes. The morning of Charlotte's school charity speech arrived with an unusual buzz of excitement. Word had spread among the parents and staff that Princess Charlotte would be addressing the assembly, and while the school tried to maintain normalcy, there was an undeniable sense of anticipation in the air. Charlotte herself seemed completely calm as she prepared, her uniform immaculate, and her notes organized with military precision. William and Catherine had decided to attend the assembly, though they tried to keep their presence as low-key as possible. They sat in the back row, watching their daughter take the stage with a confidence that was both impressive and slightly heartbreaking. Charlotte stood at the podium, looking tiny behind the large microphone, but her voice carried clearly through the assembly hall. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her voice steady and clear. "Today, I want to talk to you about the importance of helping others, not because we have to, but because we can make a real difference in people's lives." As Charlotte continued her speech, Catherine found herself studying her daughter's mannerisms. Every gesture seemed carefully considered, every pause perfectly timed. The speech itself was beautiful and heartfelt, discussing the charity's work with homeless families and the importance of compassion in society. But watching Charlotte deliver it was like watching a small adult rather than a 9-year-old child. The audience was captivated. Charlotte spoke about visiting homeless shelters with her parents and learning about the challenges faced by families without stable housing. She discussed the charity's programs with a depth of understanding that surprised even the adults in the room. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. But Charlotte simply nodded politely and returned to her seat with the composure of someone who had been giving speeches for decades. After the assembly, Charlotte was surrounded by classmates who were excited and impressed by her performance. But instead of basking in their praise like most children would, Charlotte seemed more focused on analyzing her own performance, asking her teacher if her voice had carried to the back of the room and whether her timing had been appropriate. "You were brilliant, Charlotte," said her friend Emma. "I could never speak in front of that many people." "It just takes practice," Charlotte replied matter-of-factly. "And it's important to be prepared for anything." The comment struck Catherine as particularly revealing. Charlotte wasn't just talking about school speeches anymore. She was preparing herself for a lifetime of public appearances and official duties that most adults would find daunting. Over the following weeks, Charlotte's transformation accelerated. She began asking to attend more official functions with her parents. Not out of curiosity or excitement, but because she wanted to observe and learn. During a visit to a local hospital, Charlotte paid careful attention to how her parents interacted with patients and staff, taking mental notes about appropriate responses to different situations. Dr. Phillips, the hospital's chief administrator, was struck by Charlotte's behavior during the visit. While her brothers had been typical children, excited by the medical equipment and slightly overwhelmed by the attention, Charlotte moved through the wards with a focus and seriousness that seemed almost professional. She asked thoughtful questions about the hospital's programs and listened intently to the answers. "She's quite remarkable," Dr. Phillips mentioned to William as they concluded their visit. "I've met many young people over the years, but I've never seen a child with such natural composure and genuine interest in the work we're doing here." William smiled politely, but inside he felt a growing concern. Charlotte's natural composure was impressive, but it was also isolating her from normal childhood experiences. She was becoming too adult, too quickly, and neither he nor Catherine knew exactly how to address it without discouraging her obvious talents and genuine desire to help others. The issue came to a head during Charlotte's 10th birthday party. Catherine and William had planned a celebration that balanced royal tradition with childhood fun, inviting Charlotte's school friends for an afternoon of games and activities in the palace gardens. They had hoped the party would encourage Charlotte to simply enjoy being a child surrounded by her peers. But throughout the afternoon, Charlotte seemed more like a hostess than a birthday girl. She moved among her guests with gracious politeness, making sure everyone felt included and comfortable, but she never quite relaxed enough to truly enjoy herself. When the children played games, Charlotte participated but seemed more concerned with ensuring fair play and good sportsmanship than with winning or having fun. "Charlotte, it's your party," Catherine said gently during a quiet moment. "You don't have to take care of everyone else. Just enjoy yourself." Charlotte looked up at her mother with a expression of mild confusion. "But Mummy, they're our guests. It's important that they feel welcome." The response was perfectly appropriate for a royal hostess, but deeply concerning coming from a 10-year-old at her own birthday party. Charlotte had internalized the responsibilities of her position so completely that she seemed unable to simply be a child, even on what should have been one of the most carefree days of her year. Later that evening, after the guests had gone home and the family had gathered for a private birthday dinner, Charlotte's behavior became even more telling. She thanked the staff for their work organizing the party with formal politeness, discussed the day's events as if she were conducting a post-event evaluation, and expressed satisfaction that everything had gone smoothly rather than excitement about the fun she had experienced. "Did you enjoy your party, darling?" William asked as they finished dinner. "Yes, Papa. I think our guests had a lovely time, and everything was very well organized. I learned quite a bit about managing events." The answer was so mature, so removed from typical childhood responses, that William felt a chill of recognition. Charlotte was describing her own birthday party as a learning experience in event management, rather than a celebration of her 10th year of life. That night, as Catherine and William finally had a chance to discuss their growing concerns privately, they realized that Charlotte's transformation had reached a point where intervention might be necessary. Their daughter was losing her childhood, not through any external pressure, but through her own intense desire to become worthy of her future responsibilities. "She's putting enormous pressure on herself," Catherine said quietly, as they sat in their private sitting room. "I watch her, and it's like she's constantly evaluating her own performance, constantly trying to improve and prepare for situations that might never arise." William nodded grimly. "She's 10 years old, and she's already thinking like someone preparing for a lifetime of official duties. I'm proud of her sense of responsibility, but I'm worried about what she's sacrificing." The conversation continued late into the night, as they tried to understand how their bright, curious daughter had transformed into someone who seemed to feel personally responsible for upholding centuries of royal tradition. Charlotte's intelligence and natural leadership abilities were remarkable, but they were also isolating her from normal childhood experiences and relationships. The next morning brought a moment that crystallized their concerns. Charlotte appeared at breakfast, dressed not in her usual weekend clothes, but in a perfectly pressed dress, more suitable for an official engagement. When Catherine asked about her clothing choice, Charlotte explained that she wanted to practice maintaining appropriate appearance standards, even during family time. "Charlotte, sweetheart, you're at home with your family. You don't need to dress formally." "But Mummy, if I don't practice good habits all the time, how will I know I can maintain them when it really matters?" The logic was sound, but heartbreaking. Charlotte had become so focused on preparation and perfection that she couldn't allow herself to relax even in the privacy of her own home. Every moment had become a training opportunity. Every interaction, a chance to improve her skills for future royal duties. The transformation was affecting Charlotte's relationships with her brothers as well. Where once she had been a playful older sister who enjoyed games and silly activities with George and Louis, she now often took on a supervisory role, correcting their behavior and reminding them of proper protocols. The spontaneous affection and casual interactions that had once characterized their sibling relationships were being replaced by Charlotte's growing sense of responsibility for their family's image and reputation. During a family walk through the palace gardens, Charlotte spent most of the time ensuring that Louis didn't get his clothes dirty and that George maintained proper posture. She seemed unable to simply enjoy the beautiful afternoon or engage in the carefree exploration that had once been her favorite part of garden walks. "Charlotte, come and see this butterfly," Louis called excitedly, pointing to a bright orange monarch that had landed on a nearby flower. "That's lovely, Louis. But please don't point, and try to keep your voice down." The gentle correction was perfectly appropriate in many contexts, but it represented how Charlotte had begun to see every moment as an opportunity for improvement and refinement, rather than simple enjoyment. Catherine and William realized they were witnessing their daughter's childhood slipping away, not through any fault of her own but through an intense dedication to becoming perfect that no child should have to carry. The little girl who had once delighted in messy art projects and spontaneous games was becoming someone who evaluated every action through the lens of royal appropriateness and public perception. The situation reached a turning point during a family movie night that had been planned as a relaxed evening together. While George and Louis settled in with popcorn and excited chatter about the film they were about to watch, Charlotte sat with perfect posture, her attention divided between the movie and her observations of how her family interacted during informal moments. When William suggested they all share their favorite parts of the movie afterward, Charlotte's response focused not on entertainment value but on the leadership qualities demonstrated by the main character and what lessons could be learned about handling difficult situations. Her analysis was thoughtful and mature, but it revealed how completely she had shifted away from simply enjoying experiences toward constantly learning from them. That night, as Catherine tucked Charlotte into bed, she made a decision to address the situation directly, despite her uncertainty about how to approach such a complex issue with a 10-year-old who seemed determined to grow up faster than anyone around her was prepared to handle. Catherine sat on the edge of Charlotte's bed, looking at her daughter who was already organizing her books and papers for the next day's classes before settling down for sleep. The sight of such methodical preparation from a 10-year-old filled Catherine with a mixture of admiration and deep concern. She had been thinking all day about how to approach the conversation they needed to have. "Charlotte, darling, can we talk for a moment about something important?" Charlotte immediately gave her mother complete attention, sitting up straighter and folding her hands in her lap with the kind of formal attention usually reserved for serious discussions with adults. Even this simple gesture highlighted how far removed Charlotte had become from typical childhood behaviors. "Of course, Mummy. Is this about my performance at school? Mrs. Henderson mentioned that you had asked to speak with her about my progress." Catherine felt her heart tighten. Charlotte's first assumption was that this conversation would be about her performance and improvement, rather than her well-being or happiness. "Actually, sweetheart, I want to talk to you about something else entirely. I've noticed that you've been working very hard lately to be perfect at everything you do." Charlotte's expression became slightly confused, as if the concept of this being a problem was difficult to understand. "Isn't that what I'm supposed to do? Isn't it important to always try my best?" "Yes, darling, it's wonderful to try your best. But I'm worried that you might be putting too much pressure on yourself. You're 10 years old, and it's perfectly fine to just be a little girl sometimes." The conversation that followed revealed the depth of Charlotte's transformation and the complexity of the situation facing the family. Charlotte explained, with remarkable articulation for her age, that she had been thinking about her future responsibilities and wanted to be prepared for whatever role she might need to fill in supporting the monarchy. She spoke about studying the lives of previous princesses and trying to learn from their examples. "Mummy, I know that George will be king someday, and I want to make sure I can help him properly. I don't want to disappoint anyone or let the family down." Catherine felt tears threatening as she listened to her daughter speak with such seriousness about concepts that most adults would find overwhelming. Charlotte had somehow absorbed not just the knowledge of her royal birth, but the full weight of centuries of tradition and expectation. She was trying to prepare herself for a lifetime of service before she had even finished her first decade of life. "Charlotte, you could never disappoint us. Your father and I love you exactly as you are, and we want you to have time to discover who you want to become, without worrying about what others might expect from you." But Charlotte's response revealed how deeply ingrained her sense of responsibility had become. "But Mummy, if I don't start learning now, how will I know if I'm capable of doing what needs to be done? How will I know if I'm strong enough or smart enough?" The question broke Catherine's heart because it revealed that Charlotte's intense preparation wasn't coming from ambition or excitement about her future role, but from a deep fear of inadequacy. Her 10-year-old daughter was driving herself toward perfection because she was terrified of being unprepared for challenges that might not arise for decades, if ever. William joined the conversation, sitting down on Charlotte's other side and taking her small hand in his. "Charlotte, do you remember when you were learning to ride your bicycle? You didn't become perfect at it immediately, and that was fine. You fell down sometimes, and you got back up, and eventually, you learned. Growing into royal responsibilities works the same way. But Papa, what if falling down means I fail at something important? What if people get hurt because I wasn't ready? The conversation continued for nearly an hour, with Catherine and William trying to help Charlotte understand that childhood wasn't a period to be rushed through but a valuable time for growth, exploration, and yes, even failure. They talked about the importance of making mistakes and learning from them, rather than trying to avoid all mistakes through excessive preparation. Charlotte listened carefully to everything her parents said, but her responses revealed how difficult it would be to help her rediscover the carefree aspects of childhood. She had convinced herself that constant improvement and preparation were not just beneficial, but essential for anyone in her position. Over the following weeks, Catherine and William made deliberate efforts to create opportunities for Charlotte to simply be a child. They planned family activities that emphasized fun over learning, encouraged her to spend time with friends without any structured agenda, and tried to model more relaxed behavior themselves during family time. But Charlotte's response to these efforts was telling. During a family game night designed to be purely fun, she found ways to turn the activities into learning experiences. When they played board games, she analyzed strategy and decision-making processes. During art projects, she focused on technique improvement rather than creative expression. Charlotte, William said gently during one such evening, "You don't have to turn everything into a lesson. Sometimes it's perfectly fine to just enjoy what you're doing without trying to improve at it." Charlotte looked genuinely puzzled by this suggestion. "But Papa, if I'm not learning or improving, then I'm wasting time, aren't I?" The response highlighted the core of the problem. Charlotte had become so focused on self-improvement and preparation that she had lost the ability to find value in activities that were purely enjoyable. The concept of doing something simply for pleasure, without any educational or developmental benefit, had become foreign to her. The turning point came during a visit to Catherine's parents, where Charlotte's cousins were spending the weekend. The other children immediately launched into the kind of chaotic, joyful play that characterizes normal family gatherings. But Charlotte remained on the sidelines, observing rather than participating. "Come on, Charlotte," called her cousin James. "We're building a fort in the garden. Come on." Charlotte, cousin James. Charlotte's response was careful and considered. "That sounds lovely. But I should probably help the adults with preparations for lunch." Catherine watched this interaction with growing alarm. Her 10-year-old daughter was choosing adult responsibilities over childhood play, not because she was forced to, but because she no longer seemed to understand the value of unstructured fun. Later that day, Catherine found Charlotte sitting alone in the garden, reading a biography of Queen Victoria, while her cousins continued their games nearby. The image was striking. A small girl in a sundress, completely absorbed in studying the life of a monarch, while the sounds of childhood laughter and play carried on around her. "Charlotte, why don't you go play with James and the others? They're having such a good time." Charlotte looked up from her book with the expression that was both thoughtful and slightly sad. "I tried to join them, Mummy. But I kept thinking about whether we were being too loud, or whether the game was appropriate. It was easier to just come sit here." This moment crystallized everything Catherine and William had been observing. Charlotte hadn't just become more serious and responsible. She had developed an internal critic that was preventing her from engaging in normal childhood activities. She was constantly evaluating everything through the lens of appropriateness and improvement, unable to simply exist in the moment without judgment or analysis. That evening, Catherine and William had a long conversation with Catherine's parents, who had also noticed Charlotte's transformation. Their outside perspective confirmed what the immediate family had been observing. Charlotte was growing up too fast, taking on burdens that no child should carry, and losing essential aspects of childhood in the process. "She reminds me of you when you were young," Catherine's mother said gently to her daughter. That same sense of responsibility and desire to do everything perfectly. But Charlotte seems to feel it even more intensely. The observation led to a deeper discussion about the unique pressures facing royal children and the challenge of helping them develop normally while also preparing them for their future roles. Charlotte's situation was particularly complex because her intelligence and natural leadership abilities made her transformation seem positive and impressive, even as it was isolating her from normal developmental experiences. The family decided that intervention was necessary, but it would need to be carefully planned and implemented. Charlotte's intense focus on self-improvement and royal preparation wasn't something that could be changed overnight, particularly since it stemmed from her own deep-seated fears about adequacy and her genuine desire to serve her family and country well. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a child psychologist who specialized in working with children from high-profile families, was quietly consulted. Her assessment confirmed the family's concerns. Charlotte was experiencing what could be described as premature adulthood, taking on psychological burdens that were inappropriate for her developmental stage. Charlotte is an exceptionally bright and capable child, Dr. Mitchell explained during a private consultation with Catherine and William, but she's also carrying anxiety about future performance that's preventing her from engaging in age-appropriate activities and relationships. The challenge will be helping her understand that childhood isn't preparation time for adulthood, but a valuable period of development in its own right. The intervention that followed was gradual and carefully implemented. Rather than trying to discourage Charlotte's interest in her royal heritage and responsibilities, the focus was on helping her develop a more balanced perspective. Family activities began to emphasize process over outcome, enjoyment over improvement, and present moment awareness over future preparation. Charlotte's response to these changes was initially resistant. She struggled to understand why activities that didn't lead to improvement or learning were valuable. But slowly, with patient guidance and modeling from her family, she began to rediscover aspects of childhood that she had abandoned in her drive toward perfection. The first real breakthrough came during a family camping trip where technology and formal routines were deliberately left behind. Away from the palace and its reminders of royal protocol, Charlotte found herself engaging in spontaneous activities without her usual self-monitoring. She built sandcastles without critiquing the engineering, told silly jokes without analyzing their appropriateness, and even got her clothes dirty while exploring tide pools. "This is actually quite fun," she admitted to Catherine, as they sat by the campfire on their final evening. Her face smudged with marshmallow, and her hair tousled from a day of unstructured play. Catherine felt her heart lift with hope as she looked at her daughter, who for the first time in months looked like the 10-year-old child she was supposed to be. The journey back to balanced childhood would be long and require ongoing attention. But this moment proved that the joyful, curious little girl they remembered was still there, waiting to be rediscovered beneath the layers of premature adult responsibility she had wrapped around herself. The camping trip marked the beginning of Charlotte's slow return to a more balanced childhood. Though the family knew that helping her maintain that balance would require ongoing effort and attention. The little girl who had nearly disappeared beneath the weight of royal expectation was beginning to emerge again, bringing with her a newfound understanding that being perfect wasn't nearly as important as being authentically herself.